MMC, the Canadian Nuke Cybersecurity Standard, and NIS 800-171.
Thank you so much, Karim. And my name is Karim Brissons. I'm the manager of growth and sales strategy. So what's employing aerospace defense critical infrastructure and also the CMMC 2.0. But just make a little review of StreamScan, just to explain you for ones who doesn't know us. So our goal is to safeguard manufacturing companies, along with those in the aerospace, defense, and critical infrastructure sector from cyber threat. We also specialize into network monitoring and instant response since 2011. We also offer support to help organizations meet compliance requirement for framework like NIST 800-171, CMMC, and the CPCSC. Is one of the few Canadian organizations recognized as a registered provider organization, as we call RPO. So we are qualified to assist companies in their journey towards the CMMC compliance, which is the most difficult compliance at this day. So the first topic of this presentation will be the top cybersecurity threat and risk that we're facing into the defense and critical infrastructure. So one of the first top risk that we see is the ransomware. Ransomware attack have surged dramatically with human-driven attack rising by 2.75 times in 2023, according to the Microsoft Digital Defense Report in 2024. So critical industries such as aerospace and defense have become prime targets for the cyber criminal looking for extort large sum. So this attack not only put financial pressure on organization, but also jeopardize the operational continuity of key infrastructure. So the consequences can be devastating in causing long-term disruption and significant financial losses. So given the growing sophistication of this threat, organizations in high-risk sector must take proactive steps to safeguard their operation and ensure robust defense mechanisms that are in place. Well, the number two top risk that we see is the intellectual property thief. So your organization intellectual property, including strategic innovation and proprietary technology is highly valuable, not only for your commercial competitors, but also to foreign state actors. So these entities are increasingly leveraging cyber attack to gain unauthorized access to sensitive data, undermining both of your market position and also national security. In 2022, 2023, we see 50% of aerospace and defense company reported targeted attacks aimed their intellectual property, according to the Cybersecurity Infrastructure and Security Agency. These attacks often go unnoticed until significant damages has been done. So whether it's a loss of competitive edge or a compromise in national sovereignty. The growing trend of intellectual property thief highlights the urgent need to security measure to protect valuable data. So a breach in this area is not only impact the immediate financial standing of an organization, but can also lead to long-term strategic consequences. So it can affect innovation, strategic consequences, partnership, national interest. So it's very critical for any organization in sensitive industry to ensure robust cybersecurity protocols and risk mitigation strategy that are in place to safeguard their intellectual assets. The number three also that we see a lot and is very critical is the disruption of the supply chain. So the defined supply chain is a critical pillar supporting the national security, and the disruption it can have far-reaching consequences. So cyber attacks targeting key supplier not only cause delay across the entire supply chain, but also undermine the operational capacity of the national defense systems. So these attacks are then strategically motivated, leveraging the vulnerabilities within the supply chain as a means to exert geopolitical pressure. So in recent incident, cyber criminals have target leading suppliers, some of which control up to 30% of the market share. So these attacks have exposed the significant vulnerabilities present in the critical supply chain, posing a direct threat to the defense capabilities. So this provided by the National Cyber Threat Assessment, the report of 2025 and 2026, to highlight the growing trend of search target disruption. So he's emphasizing the need of a stronger cybersecurity measure across all the levels of the defense supply chain, as adversary increasingly exploit this weakness. So it's essential for companies within this sector to strengthen their cybersecurity defenses, ensure the resilience of the operation, and safeguarding national defense readiness. And this is firmly why the topic of today that we will talk about the CPCSC, because it's one of the main reasons why those certifications are put in place. So the number one, the phishing. So phishing is the human vulnerability still up to the list. So it's continuing to be the most prevalent and effective method used by cybercriminals to infiltrate organization. Cybercriminals often impersonate high-ranking company executive to manipulate employees or business partner into transferring funds, divulging sensitive information, or granting unauthorized access. So these deceptive tactics exploit human trust, making a significant vulnerability in cybersecurity defense. So the recent data that we see on the screen here is that 91% of cyber attacks begin with a phishing email, with over 60% of these target an executive or employee in key organizational role. So in 2023, this trend became even more alarming as cybercriminals increasingly focus on high-level personnel recognizing the valuable asset they control. The impact of such an attack is very substantial because in 2024, the phishing-related incidents have led to significant financial losses and critical breaches of sensitive data. So the ease and effectiveness of phishing attack underscore the importance of robust cybersecurity awareness and training programs to mitigate this growing threat. This source is from Proofpoint. So for those who doesn't know what Proofpoint is one of the leader into the email security platform. So we just see a top 4 about what we see recently can be the most risk that we can see into this critical organization. But in 2025, we need to take in consideration that awareness and training is a must. So we see the recent cyber attacks incident clearly highlight a recurring issue. So the human error continue to be the most common entry point for cyber attacks. Whether it is a misstep in clicking a malicious link, failing to recognize a phishing email, or overlooking security protocols, these mistakes can open the door to significant threat. So as we move in 2025, this is more critical than ever to emphasize comprehensive cybersecurity training and awareness across all levels of the organization. This responsibility falls squarely on the shoulder of the leadership, is a responsibility to the management to not only endorse, but actively promote and implement a culture of cybersecurity awareness through the organization. So it's important to have a proactive approach on ongoing training, periodic attack simulation, regular updates to security protocol will help employees to stay alert to the evolving nature of cyber threat. So what we put on the screen is just demonstrating why cybersecurity risks are escalating, particularly in critical sector like defense and aerospace. So those attacks targeting the defense supply chain threaten both national security and business operation. So in this response, the Canada introduced the CPCSC certification that our colleague Tyler will have the chance to explain to you to ensure companies in these sectors to adopt the necessary protective measurements. So this certification is becoming a crucial requirement for organizations to maintain not only security, but also competitiveness for the supply chain. So by obtaining the CPCSC certification, companies can strengthen their cybersecurity defenses, reduce risk, and also align with the national efforts to secure their critical infrastructure. So for the second part of this webinar, I will let Tyler here to take a step to presenting his part.
Hey, good morning again. As I said, I'm the director of the Cybersecurity Certification Secretariat in the Canadian Embassy in Washington. We are part of Public Services Procurement Canada, and we work with several departments and agencies across the federal government in the creation and implementation of what will be hopefully a cybersecurity certification for defense procurement. I'm going to try and move through this presentation fairly quickly to maintain give as much time as possible at the end for questions, but I would like to say thank you to StreamScan and Karim for the opportunity to present to you and explain a little bit what we are intending in terms of creating this certification for defense contractors. Next slide, please. So I'm going to very briefly touch on the context. I think most people understand. Karim just did a great job sort of giving an overview of the cybersecurity situation in Canada. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about the key objectives of CPCSC. Talk about our implementation timeline. I'm going to touch on the final rule, the CMMC final rule in the United States. And then, like I said, I'm going to turn it over for questions, and I'm happy to try and answer as many as possible in the time we have. Next slide, please. Oh, sure. So just before I get into the context, or right just before I get into the details of the presentation, I did want to touch on a little bit to say this program really reflects the integrated nature of the defense industrial base in North America. 49% of Canadian exports go to the United States, and with the U.S. implementation of their cybersecurity maturity model certification 2.0, we're seeing an effort to increase the cybersecurity resilience of defense contractors, particularly around unclassified information held on their systems. The other thing I'll just touch on, CPCSC fills a gap in Canada's national cybersecurity strategy and is part of the national cybersecurity strategy that was just announced 2 weeks ago. So it is part of the broader cybersecurity effort by the federal government. Next slide, please. Okay, so CPCSC has 5 key objectives, as I already touched on. First off, to protect Government of Canada data that is held on contractors' systems. Anyway, and then to do this, we want to increase the cyber resilience of the entire defense industrial base and their supply chains. We would like, another key goal is to maintain the integrity of the whole system. Basically, at the end of the day, this is about getting equipment and services in the hands of our warfighters, and that's what we want to achieve, and that's one of our key goals. We also very much are interested in using this as an opportunity to grow the cybersecurity industry in Canada, provide an opportunity for small and medium-sized enterprises to get into this space and to be active in the cybersecurity industry. And then lastly, we want to maintain a North American defense industrial base. So we want to work closely with our U.S. allies, both in terms of the sales and acquisition of goods and services in the defense space as material moves back and forth across the border. Next slide, please. Sorry, and just as I go into the meat of the presentation, can I just say, if you have a question on a specific slide, please go ahead and raise your hand. If not, please save it for the end, and we'll try and address sort of the bigger questions then. Okay, so our program, the CPCSC program, is very closely aligned and very closely based on what was set up by the U.S. for CMMC. So excuse me. It starts with 3 levels of certification. The first level is sort of the foundational level. Eventually, the bulk of defense contracts will require level 1. This is a self-assessment. You self-assess against 12 controls. You will use a self-assessment tool that we are developing that will be available online. It will give you your results, and that result will you can upload to our repository system, and then it will be verified that you have level 1. You have to do this annually. It's pretty straightforward. There will be lots of guidance to help people with the tool and how to do the uploads to our Canada Buys system initially, and then eventually there will be a permanent repository for this information. And these are also, each level is based on the lower level, so you have to have level 1 to move to level 2. So level 2 is the advanced or a higher risk profile. In this case, it uses all the controls in the Canadian Industrial Cybersecurity Standard, which we'll talk on. I see you. I'll get you in 1 second. And your assessment against those controls is done by an accredited third party. You need that to be recertified every 3 years, and you need to attest every year that you still meet all of the controls. And then finally, there will be level 3. This will be only for the most sensitive of contracts. And we've looked at it, we think it's going to be about 1 to 3% of contracts, that's it. In this case, it uses additional controls that are coming from NIST 800-172, which will also have a Canadian version to follow, and then the actual assessments will be done by a team at the Department of National Defense. Once again, you will need to be reassessed every 3 years, and you need to attest every year, and you must have a level 2 before you even start your level 3. Sorry, I did see a question. Please go ahead. Sorry, there was somebody put their hand up.
Yes. Manson Backley, I give you the authorization if you want to speak.
Thank you. I've been looking at this for a while. I was wondering where we can get the control list. That wasn't able to find.
So I'm going to get to there a little bit later, but no problem. So the controls, you can look at NIST 800-171. That is the controls. Those are the same controls are used for CMMC, same controls for CPCSC. The Canadian standard, which uses exactly the same controls. What's made it Canadian is we use Canadian reference documents, Canadian spelling, and it's available obviously in both official languages. It's coming imminently, and it will be available to anybody who wants it, and then eventually available publicly on the web.
Thank you.
Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so for CPCSC, each contract is going to be assessed for which level of certification is required. That assessment has been developed by Department of National Defense. It will be available as part of their guidance package for contractors, but it basically uses a risk assessment looking at complexity and necessity for the warfighter. And so using those two pieces, each contract will be determined if it's a level 1, a level 2, or a level 3. The other key piece is prime contractors will have access to the same tool because they are required to flow those requirements down to their subs basically via contract clauses. So everyone will know going into or as you bid what level of certification is required. Next slide, please. Oh, and again, Sorry. Okay, so I already touched on a lot of this, but so the standard is the National Institute of Standards and Technology, 800, 171, and 172. In Canada, we will be using revision 3 as the basis for ours. So very shortly will be available the Canadian version. But as I said, the controls, so the 117 controls are identical. So anyone who wants to know what you will be required to demonstrate, those are already available, and we will, like I said, it will be available with the Canadian language in both languages and the Canadian source material very shortly. Okay, next slide, please. Oh, sorry, let me just say, the second standard, the 172 standard, which is for level 3, is forthcoming. NIST is currently doing their revision 3. Once that's finalized, the Canadian Center for Cybersecurity will take those final technical controls and make the Canadian standard. So the Canadian version won't be available until late 2025 or even early 2026. Okay, next slide. Okay, so I'm going to now get into where we are and sort of timelines. So this is going to be sorry, I saw there was a question. Can we come back to that afterwards, at the end? Yeah. No, please, Karine. No, we're at the implementation. I just saw that question came in, and then I think it's one we can deal with that after the presentation.
Yes, so for all the questions, so we see some question in the chat, and we will responding on the Q&A session.
Perfect, thank you. Okay, so we're going to implement CPCSC in a series of phases. The first phase is coming between now and the end of March. It will see the release of the standard. It will see the opening of the accreditation ecosystem. So company or organizations interested in being a certification body or an assessor will be able to speak to the Standards Council of Canada and start that process. Later in the spring, the level 1 self-assessment tool and the guidance and the repository will open for companies that wish to start their self-assessment process prior to any contracts requiring level 1. And then we will be also testing level 1 with select contracts during that phase, and then moving into a second phase later in 2025, where we start to test level 2, and the very first RFPs will begin to have level 1 applied. Okay, next slide, please. Sort of lays out what I just said. And then moving on, you can see that late 2025, early 26, we expect we will have our Canadian version of NIST 800-172. So the controls that will be applied for level 3. And then moving into 2026, you'll start to really see certification requirements show up in contracts at level 1 and level 2, and the first level 3s will be tested. During the implementation phases, certification will be required by contract award, Eventually, when this is at a steady state, certification will become a bid requirement in your RFPs. Next slide, please. Oh, and the next one. Okay, yeah, and so the last thing I would like to touch on just is the US CMMC final rule, which came out in October. It entered into force in December of 2024, and once the DFAR rule, final rule comes into force sometime this spring, with an implementation date we expect in summer 2025, the US CMMC timeline will be set and they will move to a 4-year. So every 12 months for 4 years, they will move forward with the next phase of their implementation. And then a couple things that changed from the proposed rule to the final rule. One, US DoD opened their accreditation ecosystem to foreign assessors. They have allowed anyone who wants to take the CAICO courses and write the CAICO exam to be accredited as a CMMC assessor under Cyber AB. The one limitation or the one additional criteria is you must be able to pass a US government Tier 3 security check, but you don't actually, it's hard to explain. You don't actually have to pass it because you're not a US citizen, but you have to be able to meet the requirements of a US Tier 3 security check. And the other big change they brought is they're trying to bring some harmonization between CMMC and some of the other US federal programs, the big one being FedRAMP. There is one other key change, which is the final rule does not really permit for the recognition of foreign certifications. So we continue to work with the US government. Both sides recognize that we are using identical controls. We have a very similar system. So we're going to continue to look at ways to work together to reduce the duplication of both across the certification programs. And that's next slide, please. And then if you have questions or would like to follow up with anything, please feel free to reach out to my team. I have my very, very secure email address here that no one could ever guess at. And then we also have a website, which will have all the latest updates. When the standard's available, it will be there. Any news coming on when new phases are being implemented will also appear there. But please, we invite you and encourage you to reach out to us if you have questions.
We will share also the emailing question in after this webinar.
And then now I'd be happy to take questions. So we can either start with the chat or hands. Yep.
Awesome. So we seem to be having some question here. So just way before that we going for the question marks. So Karim, I don't know if you want to explain a little bit what the next step following this webinar, what client must doing for the next step, knowing then we having the CPC coming, what the company should do in the first steps.
Okay. For me, at this time, as you know, the Canadian cybersecurity certification is based on NIST 800-171, Rev 3. The US CMMC is based on NIST 800-171, Rev 2. There is some difference between them, but good news is that now we know that Rev 3 is in place, is enforced. We have just to take it and to do a gap analysis. doing gap analysis is like you take all the requirements for NIST 800-171 Rev 3, and you see if you have this requirement in place on your system, your network, or not. And you identify the gaps. And after that, you will be able to just plan the correction of your gap to be able to meet what the Canadian cybersecurity requirement is asking for. And of course, like in some case, the advice that I can give to companies, like if you have a provider from Canadian Defense and US Defense, you have to just take the right path to ensure that you can meet the requirement for the Canadian certification and also the US certification, because between Rev 2 and Rev 3, there are new domains that appear. For example, the US certification is based on 14 domain, and the Canadian one is based on 17 domains. There are 3 new domains that you will have to take into account when you want to comply to the certification. And of course, all this information are available on the Rev 3 of NIST that you can download for free, and just take it and look to see what you have to do to comply to this certification. And other things that I can talk about is the quick wins that you can have when you do some implementation. Because in the past years, we work with a lot of companies to help them to comply to the US CMMC. And sometimes we see that company, they will start putting in place the requirement without understanding what the requirements are. You have to be sure that you well understand the requirements, that you can implement them, because if you don't do that, you will waste your time, and maybe 10 months later, you will see that the measures that you put in place are not the right thing to do. This is the reason why I strongly advise company, if you don't have internal people having the right skill to do the job, just to find someone externally who have expertise to better understand CMMC of a Canadian certification and to help you to put in place what is asked by the certification.
Exactly. We see it with CMMC, so we recommend to companies to be in the proactive approach with this certification, because it's going to be mandatory for all the supply chain of defense. So we think that we're having a lot of different people here having some commentaries and stuff. So we're starting with James. James, I'm going to give you the access of the microphone so you can speak. You can ask your question.
Can you hear me okay now? Yep.
Yes, we
Okay.
heard you.
All right, so I've got a couple of questions here, which I'm gonna nail out, but to start this off, my business partner was the one that developed the CMMC with a panel of 3 people for the US Department of Defense originally, and I serviced on the ITAAC, the sister organization that actually works with what is now CyberAB. With that being said, just recently, I've met with the Ministry of Economic Development, Job Creation and Trade Ontario with a number of different ministers based on regulatory compliance in regards to cybersecurity. Now, if we're going to pull things back, ICED was the original creator to develop a Canadian standard, which ultimately failed because it meant no compliance with the CMMC. Standards Council of Canada steps in, pays $50 million for the CMMC program to be developed, and stated that there was an official partnership between Canada and the US which did not exist. And that's coming from the fact that we do work with the US government. Now you're stating that the SCC has created the CPCSC. I have not seen any reading or official royal ascension that actually implements this into law, especially when we're so close to a federal election where it's pretty much a given that the PC party will step in. Any type of attempt of creating this kind of standardization this close to a federal election, there is no guarantee that this thing will survive by the end of this year, based on 2 things. 1, if the PC party steps into power, and 2, again, you have to pass this through law in a standard procedure. Standards Council of Canada does not have the ability to supersede the federal government in pertaining to creating of law. So how exactly do you feel that the SEC can implement a new policy developed to work with the CMC, and I would have to see a formal agreement signed by the US government giving you the authority to doing that as a Canadian body? I'm a Canadian citizen, and I own my companies in the United States working with the US Department of Commerce. So I just wanted to make it really clear that I have a lot of question marks and a lot of red flags going off with what you have covered and stated to this people or these people. And also there's going to be a lot of question marks because of the fact that as of now, other than having different documents being supplemented, nothing has had royal ascension in the last 9 years. So can you possibly explain briefly, and I know that covered a lot, but explain to me briefly how the SEC plans to enforce this without going through a legal legislative process, please?
Sure, sir, I'm happy to. So the standard is established by the Cyber Center, this Cybersecurity, Canadian Center for Cybersecurity, so part of CSEC, the Communication Security Establishment. They have produced many standards on cybersecurity. It will be implemented by my department, the Department of National Defense, through our contracts. The Standards Council of Canada's responsibility in this is simply to set up the accreditation ecosystem. So to allow or to set up a certification body, something similar to what CyberAV has done, and then make sure that the people who are the third parties who will assess companies that they have met the controls have met a base level of knowledge and a base number of requirements and expertise to be able to do that assessment. There is no royal assent required in this. This is not a law. This is a standard that is being applied through our federal contracting.
A standard still has to be applied to meeting conditions of legislation in order to be enforceable. For you to develop something like this impacts, let's say, the 36 million that the federal government has applied to the CCC to develop new cyber guidelines without going through procurement. I'm sorry, but I still don't see where what you're saying is completely viable, because it's still breaching standard protocol with procurement services, with NATO security clearance, with other conditions that have been implemented long before this rule or guideline came into place. But again, setting up compliance is just compliance. It's not enforceable. It's not guided. It is an idea in order to base solutions on a problem. But from what you're telling me is there's no legislation, there's no law, there's no governance. So why should anyone have to pay money to take this when there's no application to law in accordance to the Upper Canada Law Society?
Well, sir, it will fall under your contract, and that's the contract law. I would be happy to follow up with you directly after this, and
Sure.
have this discussion with you in detail.
No problem.
Thank you so much, James. So we're gonna go in the Q&R. I'm gonna start with the first question that we have. So Jeffrey asked, do you visualize that CPCSC will replace the CMMC for Canada?
Yes, and CPCSC will be the Canadian certification. So let me see. There is nothing that stops Canadian companies getting CMMC. If you want to sell to the United States Department of Defense, you will require CMMC. However, for Canada, it will be CPCSC, and that is what the Department of National Defence will be looking for, and my department, Public Services and Procurement Canada, as when we issue defense contracts.
Thank you so much. And we have another question from Jeffrey. So how is different from control goods? So CPCSC with the control goods.
So controlled goods was created to respond to the US ITAR requirements. This is intended to apply to unclassified information of a sensitive nature that is being used as part of contracts. So it responds to different different needs. The two do overlap, and we recognize that.
We have a question that I think you answer it a little bit, but I think we're going to just do it again. So does the CPCSC Level 2 self-assessment not require C3PAO certification, as the CMMC 2.0 will require certification, by example?
Sorry, can you repeat that, please, Courtney?
So does the CPCSC Level 2 self-assessment not require C3PAO certification?
Okay, so this is a key difference between CPCSC and CMMC. The US CMMC will allow certain level 2 self-assessments. CPCSC will not. You can only self-assess at level 1. At level 2, you will have to get a third-party assessment. Sorry, is there a second? What was the second part of that question?
That was more specific, as the CMMC 2.0 will require certification, but I think you just responded.
Yeah, so yes, both will require third-party certification.
Perfect. We have a question for Jivan. So are there any specific controls or guidelines for marine engineering, IoT, and or data associated with remote firmware devices? So I think it's super niche and specific type of question.
Yeah, and way beyond my technical ability. So I can either ask and I can either take that question and go back or and follow up with you directly after the fact, because I don't have that answer for you right now.
Would like to
Anyone
add
say
something. Don't forget that the Canadian certification is based on NIS 800-171 Rev 3. When you take this NIS standard, there is a section talking about what we call specialized asset. There is a lot of category of asset. One of the asset category is a specialized asset. This include IoT equipment, operational technologies, government furnished equipment, and other kind of system. When you work on or you use such kind of devices, there is some special rule from NIS 800-171 to put them in the scope or out of scope of what level of certification you need to have.
Thank you, Karim. So here we're having a question I think a lot of people will have. So will Canadian defense suppliers require 2 certification to bid on US and Canadian defense contract? So the CMMC and also the CPCSC.
So you need, to answer it, I guess, you need CMMC to bid on US Department of Defense contracts. You will need CPCSC to bid on Canadian contracts. If you intend to bid on both, you will require both certifications, and we are still working with the US government as to how we might be able to reduce some of that duplication. As we said, the controls are identical, so we're trying to see if there are ways we could do joint certification, because many of the assessors will be the same and can assess for the certifications in both countries. I expect that will probably start with level 3, as there is a very close relationship between DND and DoD on and previous experience with joint certification. The level 2 may take longer. I hope that answers your question.
Awesome. So we have a question from James. So how are you thinking about the risk of basing the program on the standard controlled by a U.S. government agency at a time U.S. government agency are experiencing unprecedented turbulences?
That's a very fair question. I think we are comfortable with the NIST 800-171 standards. That's seems to be largely an accepted standard globally for cybersecurity. If there are significant changes, we will have to reassess that, and that, and then it would fall to the Cyber Center to develop or redevelop our standards. And it's a huge if, we got to a world where we no longer were able to work cooperatively with NIST.
Perfect. Thank you. And another question from Christine. So are there any federal program available to help small businesses to pay for certification costs?
So that's a great question. The federal government itself does not have any programs currently. There are some programs available from some of the regional development agencies, that's also federal, but some of the regional development agencies have some programs. Some of the associations have some programs. There will also be, all of the tools to help you. So level 1 self-assessment. There will be a level 2 self-assessment preparation guide to help a company get ready for level 2. But there are no direct programs to assist or to defray the costs of a level 2 or just a level 2 certification.
Thank you so much. And also we know that actually you have some different organizations as POMP or different type of cluster that can help you to getting through different certifications. So if they need to getting grants, so you can ask to your cluster of your industry if they want to create a program to obtain grants. So if they see this is going to be a need, they will probably work on this too. So we have a question from Derek. So how do organizations in Canada get certified to conduct the CPCSC external audits for level 2 or 3?
Okay, so easy part of that question, you can't get certified at level 3. That level 3 audits will be done by the Department of National Defense. They have stood up a team specifically for that. Level 2 audits will, the assessors and the certification bodies will be known once the standard comes out. Then the Standards Council of Canada will share with everyone who is certified, and under each of those certification bodies, who their assessors are, who have been accredited. That will be available on the Standards Council of Canada website. It will be available on my website or my team's website, the CPCSC website. So that information, once it's available, will be disseminated, will be publicly available. We want everyone to know who is available, who is out there in the marketplace that you could reach out to help you with your certification. I will say there is another difference between CPCSC and CMMC. There are no RPOs in the CPCSC. There are no certified companies to help people get or prepare for assessments.
So I heard the same question that I had, which is, how do you get to be the assessor?
Oh, sorry. Sorry, I misunderstood your question. So that will come out. So the first once the standard comes out, the first thing that Standards Council will do is take applications to be a certification body. The certification bodies will then take applications for people who want to be assessors. So they will apply the requirements that the Standards Council of Canada has put on them, and those assessors will be able to apply directly to get accredited. Or sorry, not accredited. Yes, sorry, accredited by those certification bodies.
We have another question from Andrew. Andrew, I'm going to give you the access to speak. You can ask your question now. Andrew?
Sorry about that. So I work with Paisley
Awesome.
Partners. I'm an insurance broker that specializes in insurance for defense. And with that, we deal with cyber insurance for a lot of defense companies. Now, what we're seeing as of late with the claims that are going through is it's incredibly important to have all of the requirements for security to make sure things don't happen. But what we're seeing more is less state actors going after IP to try to get a move up on us, and more non-state actors going after IP to hold it for ransom. Is there any plans within this program to put some kind of cyber insurance requirement in so that if a company has, again, some form of proprietary IP that is important to whatever item that they're going to be delivering to the defense supply chain, if that IP gets stolen and the strict only reason for it to be stolen is financial gain of the perpetrator, is there something that's going to be put in place to make sure that companies have some kind of, again, either insurance plan or other plan in place to be able to pay those ransoms to continue working, rather than not be able to pay them and then Lord knows where the IP goes after they get in?
That's a very fair question, Andrew. And no, we aren't planning right now to have an insurance requirement. That's yes, the sort of the short answer. It has been raised. It was because it was part of the sort of predecessor program, Cyber Secure Canada. I'm not saying it is not a possibility. It's not something we wouldn't consider as we look at the future of this program, but as currently designed, the program doesn't have an insurance requirement.
Understood.
We have another question from Thierry.
I think I just had my hand up, but I do have a follow-on to that, which is if there's no insurance requirement, is Canada intending on litigating against vendors that do a poor job of managing their security?
I can't speak to whether we would litigate against them, but I think where you would see it is you would be at risk of losing your federal contract. If you did not maintain your certification.
So we're having other questions. We can take another one, and for the ones doesn't be respond, we will send after this webinar a little document to explain it what the key points of this webinar was, and also with some questions that have been asked, so everybody will have it, and also we can share this presentation with you after. So we'll take a last question. So the question is, so here you respond a little bit, how many CTPAs are available in Canada to assist in certification? So when we need to start working on the certification to avoid long queue and potential disruption when the requirements come in force.
So I think I've touched, there are currently no accredited CPCSC assessors in Canada. We expect that they will start the certification bodies will apply and get themselves accredited through spring of 2025. So, and then they will begin onboarding their assessors. I can't speak to how many Canadian C3PAs are for CMMC. That is available. I know that's available on the Cyber AB Marketplace website. They list Canadian companies that are approved to do CMMC evaluations. Sorry, there was a second part of your question there.
Yes, so the second part of the question was if there's the, so just to avoiding the loan queue and potential disruption. So when the requirement come in force.
So as I touched on earlier, the level 2 piloting of level 2 will start with 1, 2, 3 contracts in the fall of 2025. Based on sort of those experiences, how those companies, give us their feedback on the experience, we will begin to roll it out into contracts. So early in 2026, but it will be phased in. So it will still be some time before level 2 is rolled out across all contracts. So there is a slow step, which will allow both companies time to prepare and allow the accreditation ecosystem to grow and for more assessors to be available. So we're hoping that there won't be that bottleneck as that people are concerned about.
Just to add some details, the US CMMC approach is different from the Canadian one. In Canada, you are not just moving to CMMC level 2. You will start by CMMC level 1, and you will finish that before moving to CMMC level 2. This is the difference that you have. At this time, you can just comply to CMMC level 1, put in place what is mandatory, and you have your self-assessment done. And later, when the federal government will be ready for CMMC level 2, you will be just jump on that and put in place what kind of gap you have to fix to comply to level 2.
Thank you, Karim. So also we will send an email for all people who are here today. So thank you so much for participating. So we will adding also the questions that people having with the answers. And also if you have some other questions, we will share the Tyler's email and also the StreamScan email if you have any questions. So I want to wish you a wonderful day and thank you to be there today.